Today I'm joined with Micky Bowman, who's the Director for the Myanmar Centre for Responsible Business. Micky, thanks for joining us today.
Nice to see you.
The Centre recommends ways that businesses can be responsible, but what exactly does responsible business mean, and how can a business act responsibly?
For us, responsible business is business which is going to benefit the Myanmar people and country in the long term. So it's business which is respecting human rights, respecting the environment. It's business which is paying taxes, which is extremely important and not necessarily a part of the tradition of doing business here. And it's business which engages with all of the stakeholders who are in some way involved in, interested in or affected by that business. So it's a transparent business that both tells stakeholders what it's doing but also listens to their concerns.
And you work very closely with the stakeholders, with the businesses. What are your aims for this project and what do you hope to achieve?
So we are working both with businesses who are coming from foreign countries but also Myanmar businesses, but we're also working with civil society groups who are particularly interested in business issues, and then we're working with the government as the regulator of business, because one of the big challenges for businesses here is that many of the laws which exist in other countries which prevent businesses from behaving irresponsibly, such as pollution laws, they don't yet exist here. So we're encouraging the government to adopt those laws and adopt them in a transparent process.
And practically, could you just explain how you're going about that? What are the first steps that you're taking?
So we've been working with different stakeholders in different ways. For example, in the case of the Investment Commission, we've worked with them to help them understand what is a responsible business, and in particular, what are the key international standards that many companies who are looking to come into the market are committed to, such as the Extractives Industries Transparency Initiative, the UN Global Compact, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So we're helping them to find their way through that maze of international initiatives, but also helping them to look at what's on a business's website or what information they're providing and look a bit at their track record and therefore understand a little bit more about, is this business a responsible business with a good track record. We've also worked with some of the foreign investors coming in who've wanted our advice on which civil society groups are relevant to their business. For example, who is working on land issues, who is working on ethnic minority issues. So we've put people in touch with civil society groups and individuals who can help them. So that's just a few ways of what we're doing.
I mean, you've spoken about your primary stakeholders being local businesses, secondary stakeholders being international businesses, but in practical terms, can you just explain what that means and how you join the two ventures together?
So for the relationship between international businesses and local businesses, it's one of the things that when the international companies come to us, it's the first thing they want to know. Who are the local businesses who will understand the anti-corruption regulations that we have to follow as international businesses? Who are the local businesses that will not be a reputational risk for us? So we help them to identify what are some of the issues they need to find out about their potential local partners. And we've also worked with some of the companies to do training for their local partners so that when an international business says, I need you as my supplier to sign up to a commitment to respect workers' rights, what we've done is help to introduce those local companies to trade unionists here who've explained about how the law on freedom of association and respect for workers' rights and minimum wages and so on is progressing. So we're trying to raise awareness amongst local businesses, both of what the international partners want, but also how the law is changing here and what overall international standards are.
So are you playing an advisory or consultancy role here? I mean, what sort of power do you have? And are these companies paying you for your services? What's the relationship?
So we don't charge for any of our services. We're an initiative which has been funded by 6 governments at the moment, which are the UK, Denmark, Norway, Switzerland, Netherlands and Ireland. So the advice we provide is a public good, and some of the research and advice that we're doing is going to be put on our website and made available to anyone who's interested in investing here or holding companies to account.
One of your big priorities is transparency, but can you just explain what is transparency and how can a company become transparent?
So transparency covers a number of different issues that your stakeholders are interested in knowing about. Some companies who are coming into the market are publicly listed in the US or the UK. Some of them are even subject to the US government reporting requirements. So they have to be extremely transparent as a matter of law. But we argue that companies actually benefit from being transparent through choice, even if laws don't require them to. And that's certainly the case in Myanmar. All the major companies here are private, they're family owned. Although there's no regulatory requirement on them to be transparent, they are going to get much more trust from both civil society and from local, from international partners if they make public information about who their ownership is, what sectors are they in, and what their group structure is, how much taxes they pay, and also issues like what their human rights policy is, what their key human rights risks are, what they're doing, for example, around the land that they're acquiring. So those are the kind of issues that we would like Myanmar companies to be much more transparent about, even if they're not required to do by law, because we think it will give them a competitive edge when making partnerships with international investors or getting domestic support for their activities.
Are companies that are owned or joint owned by the military, by the Burmese military, are they likely to be less transparent, have more of a degree of corruption there? And has the centre tried to engage the military?
I think the military-owned companies are the big challenge. I've looked for a website for Union and Myanmar Economic Holdings, Myanmar Economic Corporation. I've not found anything yet. So, you know, they are at the back end in terms of transparency. And to be honest, the challenges are already quite significant. Engaging with Myanmar companies. There's so much work to do that they are on my list, but I haven't yet got to that stage. But they are extremely important here. And overall, what I think the country needs to move towards is a world in which, if they continue to exist, they should be held to the same account as any other company and should be required to compete on a level playing field. Because transparency is also around government transparency in the way that they award contracts, in the way that they award land. And we have a very good example here of a modern approach to tendering with the telecoms contract, where the criteria were extremely clear and public. Companies bid, and that was looked at by experts, and 2 companies were chosen on the basis of the best bid. That would be a model you would want to expand to other bits of the Myanmar economy, and UMEHL or MEC should need to compete in the same way.
Could you go into a bit more about anti-corruption measures and sort of what are the steps to tackle anti-corruption?
Yeah. So for a company, one of the key things they need to have is a sign from the top, from the leadership, that paying tea money, giving gifts to government officials, or in other ways giving any kind of bribes or inducements or favours is not acceptable to the company. And the best way to do that is both to have a written policy that all the staff of the company know, but also to have the CEO or the chairman signing off on that and showing leadership. So that's something the UN Global Compact expects companies to do if they're committed to anti-corruption. And so far, I'm not finding many local companies who've yet got to that stage. One of the things we would like to do is work with them to support them on doing that. Then they need the ability to check and enforce within their company that that's actually happening on the ground. Now you're seeing with some of the international companies coming in that they're making these requirements a part of their contract with local companies. So for example, if you have Coca-Cola, they will be employing local distribution companies to send their bottles around the country. And one of the risks those local companies will have is that at the roadside the police will be demanding tea money to let the car proceed. So Coke has given their drivers or given the distribution company drivers a card in Burmese which explains Coke policy, and you know, there are Coke bottles in the back of my car. Coke policy is not to pay tea money, and if I pay tea money I will lose my job. So here is a number we can both call if that's a problem for you. Now that is obviously quite a cultural shift for this country, and it remains to be seen how that's playing out in practice. But from the company's point of view, from Coke's point of view, they've therefore looked at their corruption risks and taken steps to try to reduce the risk of bribes being paid. I think another issue around corruption is going to be the question of getting government online. If you look at any other country which is making the journey to e-government, corruption automatically starts going down once you remove people from the equation, whether it's in your customs department, immigration department. So the sooner we can get better rollout of internet and the sooner we can get government online, the better it will be both for individuals and for companies as well.
So you touched on before about companies having big social, environmental impacts. What about these big investment projects? I mean, how would you rate this responsibility factor of, for example, Shui Gas?
I think in a lot of the cases of these big infrastructure projects which have been done to date, they've largely been done by Chinese companies, with the exception obviously of the Total, Petronas, PTTEP work down in the southeast. And what we've observed is there's been not very much genuine engagement with the stakeholders and rights holders who are affected. So by and large what we're seeing is that the company says it's conducted consultation, but what they mean by that is they made a meeting with villagers and told them what was going to happen and how much compensation they were going to get. So what we would advise is there needs to be a much longer and more open and more listening, genuine consultation when you're doing a big infrastructure project like that. You're not going to get everybody satisfied, but at least if you can find out more about what their concerns are, you may be able to avoid the most irritating or damaging impacts. So for example, if you are planning to do a build of something at a particular time and you ask the villagers what impact that will have on them, and you discover that that will mean that they will have the crops with only 1 more month to be harvested will be destroyed, you as a company should be thinking, okay, let's maybe extend our plans so that we don't start building until the villagers have harvested their crops. Because even if you compensate the villagers for their crops, it's actually a very upsetting thing for a villager to see your hard work being bulldozed. So it's those kind of issues that a genuine consultation with communities will lead to better understanding, and we haven't seen that with, for example, Shui Gas.
So let's go into a bit more into the Chinese investment projects. I mean, they're very much in the limelight. What would you like to see in these investment zones? What concessions do the companies need to make?
So I think with all of these major projects, having effective impact assessments done which look at the social and human rights issues is the first step, and then having effective management plans by the company is going to help a lot. And in the course of doing those impact assessments and in the course of day-to-day engagement with communities, the company needs to get a better understanding of what the community feels about the project. Because in most of these cases, the community is not necessarily remotely interested in the electricity benefits. It's much more concerned about its agriculture, its way of life, the fact that the mountain will disappear or the river confluence will disappear. And the company needs to understand those cultural priorities and social priorities and concerns that communities have. And then it needs to do something to change its plans to mitigate as far as possible the impacts on them. Sometimes it won't necessarily be possible to meet everything that the community wants, because many farmers will say, we just don't want to stop farming. But if that's the case, you need to find ways that their livelihoods will be at least as good as, if not better, than before the project started. So in a case like the Lepidau mine, there has been a little bit of attempt to do that, but there's probably more that can be done to assist the farmers to continue farming, but to continue farming in a more productive way. And so some of the funding that the Lepidau project is now saying it's committed to supporting social projects is going to need to be used to support those kind of projects in a way which the farmers and villagers want them to be done. And that's a key point. The farmers, villagers, they need to have some sort of decision-making input into these kind of funds and projects. It can't be all done to them.
How accessible have the Chinese companies, the big investment Chinese companies, been to the Myanmar Centre? I mean, have you seen any improvements? Have you worked with them directly? We've
had some discussion with the Wanbao mine, but not as much as I would like, to be honest. And we've had very good cooperation with CNPC on the sector-wide oil and gas impact assessment that we're doing around the pipeline project. So I'm hoping that that will be a good start from the Chinese companies, because I believe that actually certainly their embassy, but also they themselves realise that they will have to change their practices here. And the Leopardau mine incidents and the Myitsone dam suspension has been a wake-up call for a number of them, that the way of dealing in the past in terms of obtaining your licence to operate no longer holds. You have to invest a lot of time and energy in getting a social licence to operate, and you don't get that through PR campaigns and through writing cheques and building schools. It's a much more fundamental activities you need to do to understand and listen and then respond accordingly.
I understand the oil and gas sector is one of the first areas you'll be looking in and conducting these sector-wide assessments. Could you tell me a little bit about what you found, sort of the state of the industry basically with regards to responsible business?
So we're still at the stage of just having finished our field research. I think, as with all of the business sectors here, one of the key issues is around land and livelihoods and the degree to which businesses have impacted on that. We've looked at the pipeline area, including the Chao Pyu and Daewoo project offshore gas. We've been looking at the Central Burma Magway Division oil business, which has been going for many years, and we've also been looking down at the south in Kambao. It's probably too early to say what we found, and there is definitely a great variety of practice, and the fact that you've had Total here for many years bringing in international best practices has obviously had a good impact on the area down there, particularly in the last 10 years or so, when they've really raised their game after some sort of difficult times to start off with. Exactly. But we're seeing, for example, that if we meet people in Magway Division who have worked with Total, people from government, they have a completely different attitude to what we're talking about compared to those who've not been in there. So I think their presence has been positive in spreading best practice, and they've actively been trying to bring together oil companies to talk about issues like safety and about environmental protection and about working with communities. So mixed picture. Definitely some major negatives on land, including around the pipeline. What we're hoping is that through the impact assessments, we will be able to find the good and the bad, particularly for the companies who are coming in now offshore. We're about to hear an offshore licensing round be announced, and that will bring a whole number of new players into the market, some of whom I suspect will be at least as good as Total, and will certainly, from our conversations with them, be very, very careful to do all the sort of things I'm talking about around community engagement and understanding the risks that they face.
Vicky, thanks for talking to me today. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to talk to you.